Across the Ben 10 series, there has been a lot of cool interesting facts or lore regarding different characters, locations, or aliens throughout the series. Whether it's stated in the show or in other stuff such as merchandise, these interesting facts are honestly really cool, but unfortunately get retconned at some point. So I thought it would be a little fun to basically talk about some retconned lore that I actually really like and wish was still canon, because I either found it really interesting and had potential for cooler stuff, or just because I just prefer it over the actual retcon we get. Now the key word here is things that I like that aren't canon. This basically means that I may not talk about very obvious retcons because I actually prefer the change over what was previously stated. A prime example of this being stuff relating to Kevin or Gwen. While that's a whole other can of worms, I'll just briefly state that I actually prefer Kevin as a mutant and I prefer Gwen being an Anodite who knows how to use magic as well. Again, that's a whole other can of worms that maybe I'll do a video on, I don't fucking know. Either that or I'll just save it for my retrospective. To start things off, I wanted to talk about the lore fact, or at least one of the two lore facts that actually inspired the idea for this video. Chromastone's homeworld. If you saw Season 3 of Alien Force, then you would see that Chromastone's DNA sample originates from one being known as Sugalite, and he was the only member of his species. This was not always the case. Before Season 3 aired, in fact, a few months before Season 3 aired, Chromastone actually had a home planet known as Morotesi. This planet would only be mentioned in merchandise, such as Chromastone's card for his 4-inch figure, and though I can never find any pictures of it, there was a Ben 10 complete guidebook that mentioned it as well as a home planet for Alien X before the Forge of Creation. I actually really like the lore we get of this planet. Morotesi used to be a very beautiful planet filled with a lot of nature and lush environments. However, after millions of years of its ozone layer decaying, it would become a barren wasteland and dangerously irradiated. Most of the species on this planet would end up becoming extinct with the exception of one, the Crystal Sapiens, which is Chromastone species. I much preferred this planet being a thing rather than Chromastone being one individual, which is basically the Jesus Christ of the Ben 10 universe. We actually get to see this planet in a very in-depth way thanks to the video game Ben 10 Vilgax Attacks. I love how the video game version of the planet takes points from the lore descriptions that we get, such as a very decayed rocky area, and a bunch of crystals and mines as well. There's also some scientific labs here, thanks to Cooper and Albedo being involved in the story. It is mentioned on the Ben 10 wiki that Morotesi does not exist in a prime timeline, but is actually a legend, and, you know, in the Ben 10 universe, most legends tend to be true, so maybe this planet does exist, it just doesn't inhabit Crystal Sapiens, but maybe another species. That'd be kinda cool if it was still in the canon somehow. Honestly, from the planets we do get to see in the Ben 10 universe, I think Morotesi is honestly one of the more interesting ones. Yes, it is barren, but in a way that's actually pretty cool. I'm not really too big on the change of Crystal Sapiens just being one guy because honestly, I never really liked Chromastone and Diamond Head being connected to each other. It's not bad by any means, and the correlations are cool to point out, but something about it just isn't my cup of tea. Honestly, Morotesi does make me wonder how Crystal Sapien society would be, considering, you know, the huge change in evolution in their planet and their environment and everything, but it's something we'll never really get to see, so that's pretty unfortunate. Speaking of homeworlds, the other homeworld that actually inspired this video was Blitzwolfer, and in fact, I wanted to talk about the Unearth aliens as a whole. In the canon, we actually get to visit the Unearth system thanks to Omniverse, where we get to see Unearth Transl up close, and we get to see all 4 main Unearth species, and even some Vladets, and by that I mean one in Ben's transformation, at some point, which is pretty cool. I may sound like a big hater, but I'm not too big on how exactly the Unearth aliens are handled in Omniverse. I actually like how all of them look, and I do like Unearth Transl as a planet, but I don't know, I'm just not too big on it, but that's a story for another day. Now the reason why I bring this up is because Blitzwolfer in canon is from the moon Luna Lobo, which is a moon in the Unearth system, which is pretty cool. However, did you know for the battle version lineup of the toys, there was actually some lore that was retconned. It still states that Blitzwolfer is from Luna Lobo, however, instead of being on the Unearth system, it was actually a wooded moon in the Null Void, and I find that very interesting. The idea of a sun and a moon in the Null Void honestly doesn't bother me considering that we get to see farmers in Alien Force, but what I think has potential for a very interesting lore is an alien being from the Null Void specifically. In canon, we see Luna Lobo is just a giant purple moon, however, in the battle version lineup, we actually get to see what looks to be very giant rock spires. I don't know if they're supposed to be trees, but they look like rocks. I honestly find that kind of interesting. We don't get to see too much, as I would assume that most of the more intricate stuff is actually deep below in this forest, but it's actually pretty cool. This is something I'm actually learning while recording the audio, if I'm being honest, but it says on the wiki that some of the background includes that it actually was once warped into the Null Void, so maybe that's to explain why it was mentioned being in the Null Void for the battle version toy, which is actually kind of a neat workaround. I actually like that, but I do kind of wish it was from the Null Void. We never actually get to step foot on Luna Lobo and Omniverse, though it would be cool if we did, considering it's mentioned to be very beautiful, in fact, one of the only beautiful places in the Unearth system. Though if you ask me, Honor Transvaal is beautiful in its own very odd way. As for Frankenstrike, this one I'm not sure necessarily may count as a retcon, but it is mentioned that he actually has the ability of regeneration, and given that he's a Frankenstein alien and his limbs have stitches, that would actually be an incredibly cool power. This was written for the card he has, and I believe the re-release of his toy for Ultimate Alien, and I'm not sure if they were planning to have this be a power or not, but it would have been kinda cool. Another power, and the more known power that he was mentioned to have, is high intelligence. I actually wouldn't mind if he had intelligence, but in a very unusual way where instead of having it all the time, considering that Frankenstrike is an electric alien, I think it would be really cool if he actually charged up and gained temporary intelligence as a result. It would set him apart from Grey Matter, who already has intelligence by default, and the future alien Brainstorm, who has intelligence by default as well, along with electricity powers. Now in Omniverse we see that Honor Transvaal is a melting pot of all the Honor aliens living together, which is honestly really cool, but in the original iteration of the planet it was actually supposed to be very, barren and have no life on it whatsoever due to all the corrodium. In fact, corrodium was a whole big deal for all these Honor planets, sort of tie into the Ghost Freak arc of Season 3. Now in Omniverse of course corrodium is not seen at all, which is kind of a shame. I would have liked to see this come back in some way. As for Snarrow, I couldn't find any sort of retcon that I prefer from what they do with his species or him in the show. However, one thing I did notice that might be not a thing we ever see kinda like the whole Frankenstrike regeneration is that one of the facts mentioned on his card for the Ultimate Alien figure re-release is that his species can communicate by moving their tendrils kinda like sign language. That's so interesting. I kinda wish we got to see some Tep Kufans actually do that in the show. And if they do, I don't remember. Also, I'm not exactly sure where to put this, so I'll just put this here now. The DNA sources for the Halloween trio, aka the Werewolf, Mummy, and Dr. Victor, would eventually be retconned to not actually be how Ben gets the alien, but more so unlocking them, and they were actually in the watch the whole time. That's not that big of a deal, but I kinda prefer them being the actual genuine DNA source. That's about it when it comes to the Honor aliens, but let's talk about a few more alien facts that I still wish were canon, starting off with Upchuck. So I'm gonna sound like a huge hater here, but the more I've seen the episode Tummy Trouble, the more I really dislike how Gourmands are in Omniverse. I think they're a little too silly, honestly. I like silly stuff in Omniverse, but I don't know, something about the Gourmands just pissed me off. But that's not my point. My point is that in Upchuck's battle version toy, and you're getting a trend here, a lot of the interesting lore comes from these battle toys, is that Upchuck's species actually had a very diverse spice trade, and considering that Upchuck's species are gluttons and eat and stuff, that's actually kind of a neat idea that I kind of wish they brought back in Omniverse. It would make them see a lot more smarter, because honestly, the Gourmands are dumb as a stump. From the battle version toy, the picture we see does make it look like the planet has kind of eaten away at most of its nutrients, which could kind of give a reason to why maybe the Gourmands evolved to eat anything really, rocks, metal, you name it. Also, if this is supposed to be some sort of tree with alien fruit or something, that's actually a really interesting design. I really like this. Comparing it to the Omniverse version of Peptos 11, it's actually still pretty good looking, but I kind of prefer the barren look that the classic series gave us in this one little picture. Quick Upchuck related tangent here, but a lot of people mention the fact that he used to not be able to eat edible food, and that it was retconned later on in Alien Force Onward that he can eat edible food. And while I do dislike the way he eats in Omniverse, it's really goofy, fucking live tigers, you fucking serious? But the thing is what does he drink in Alien Force? A Mr. Smoothie. A magically enhanced Mr. Smoothie. Okay, so he's drinking a smoothie. But here's the thing. What flavors do they have? Cement and grasshopper. That ain't no fucking edible food I ever heard of. You ever wake up in the morning and be like, man, I'm fucking famished. I could really go for that cement grasshopper smoothie. No, I honestly think that he still has the weakness. We just don't ever get to see it, because in what situation is Ben gonna be shit, Vilgax is attacking, let me go eat some fucking Pizza Hut. As for another alien with lore that I wish was canon, we have Ditto, and this one's gonna be very brief. Simply put, I kinda wish they kept his weakness, where each clone felt the same pain. While it may lead to some complications regarding certain scenes with Ditto, honestly, the weakness made him a little more interesting. He's still a great alien, but I thought the weakness was a very creative flaw. Now let's talk about an alien that's not in the Omnitrix. Let's talk about Vilgax and some of his lore that was retconned. This is probably some of my favorite facts that unfortunately got retconned, because I thought a lot of it was really interesting. So let's start with the origin of Vilgax. So where does Vilgax come from? In the show, you would say Vilgaxia, of course, but did you know that wasn't always the case? Vilgax used to be from the Shadow Realm, otherwise known as the Null Void Frontier. Now, I'm not sure what the difference between the Null Void and the Null Void Frontier would be, but I think this is actually kinda cool. We don't get much information about what exactly the Null Void Frontier is, so unfortunately I can't say much for what I think of it, but I think the potential is there. I don't mind Vilgaxia as a planet, and hell, I'm gonna be honest, hot take, I don't mind Vilgax even having a soft spot for its citizens. But when you compare that to the original lore where his species was trained to excel at combat at birth, I think this is honestly a downgrade. There's not much said about the Shadow Realm, whether or not it's the same as the Null Void Frontier, but it is mentioned that experiments were taking place here where Vulpamanters were experimented on, creating these mutated spider leg Vulpamanters we see in Grudge Match. Another minor fact that was retconned that I kind of wish stayed true was that female Chimera Sue Generis's have dark beauty marks on the center of their chin, which we see with Myax in Secret of the Omnitrix. I didn't even mention the fact that Vilgax is rumored to have a son from another dimension. Yeah, this was mentioned in the card that Vilgax has for his Ultimate Alien merchandise, and honestly, I'm not sure if that would necessarily fix the problems with Vilgax and UAF, but it would be interesting. As for the last thing I want to talk about, I'm not sure if this counts as a retcon. Some people do, some people don't. Feedback and the reason why Ben took off the Omnitrix in between the Classic series and Alien Force. Some people consider it a retcon since it was information added way later on, particularly in Omniverse. I'm still not sure if it really counts, but I'll mention it anyway just in case. Nothing in Alien Force or Ultimate Alien gave any sort of foreshadowing or suggestion to feedback even existing, so it does feel a little out of place, but it honestly makes sense to me. I like the idea of Ben wanting to take off his watch not only to live a normal life, but maybe because he makes some sort of mistake that he regrets, making him learn and grow as a character as a result. And Feedback's death is honestly a pretty cool way to integrate that in my opinion. Let's backtrack to the Omnitrix aliens and their homeworlds, because there's one alien that has kind of a dull homeworld, but it didn't used to be that way. In Omniverse, we actually get to see a small scene of Armodrillo's homeworld known as Poiana Luncas. In Omniverse, we see the planet as a very dull, generic desert, which is unfortunate considering that an alien homeworld should have a little more effort than that. I know it's for just a small scene, but it still kinda bugs me. Poiana Luncas used to be a regular planet, however the Talpadans would eventually destroy it and put it into pieces due to their earthquake-creating powers. This in turn made the whole planet into its own asteroid belt. There were mines with minerals and stuff as you'd expect from an alien with this type of power. However, one thing that's kinda cool is that the surface of these asteroids that they lived on had complex cavern systems and mazes, which is so cool, especially since they're like armadillo-like aliens. I love that, it's so unique. But in the show, we just get a regular desert. Not even like, I don't know, different colored sand or something, as weird as that would look, or any sort of constructs in the background, which again, it's a small scene, it's not a big deal, but at the same time, pretty disappointing. Before I end it off here, I did find some last minute retcons that are very minor that I kinda wish didn't get retconned that I thought I'd mention as little like honorable mentions, even though this isn't really a ranking video. Starting things off, forearms as species seem to be very basic and primitive. In fact, Koros as a whole was a little different compared to what we see in Omniverse. While both versions of Koros have red barren deserts, I kinda do like the idea of Tetramans being more primitive species than having advanced civilizations. I like how they're handled in Omniverse, but I am slightly more of a fan of how Classic would handle Koros and the Tetramans, even if we never really get to see many of them. Another lore fact that I really like that was retconned is one involving the Galvans. It was stated in Ultimate Alien that they have 3 brains, one small one in the center of their head, and then 2 behind each eye. I think it's a little more unique compared to what Omniverse does, where basically Galvans have one brain for their main intelligence, and then a second brain known as a pre-brain for bodily functions and stuff. I honestly don't mind this change either, but I do prefer the 3 brains, and I thought it was at least interesting enough to mention. And finally, the last thing we're going to talk about is the charms of Bezel, more specifically Bezel himself. As a character, I'm not really a big fan of him, as he takes away from all the cool factor that the charms of Bezel had in Classic. I think Bezel works way better as a civilization than it does an actual character. You can argue the civilization was named after Bezel, but still, I'm not too big of a fan of this change. And that about does it for all the retcon lore that I actually wish was still canon. Do you agree with my thoughts? Or do you actually like the changes they made to the lore? Was there any retcon lore that you wish I mentioned but didn't? Let me know down below. I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and as always, happy night hunting.